please sit down. We'll have to wait for... Okay. Okay. Deputies, thank you. You are all very, very welcome today. It's good to see you. I'm very sorry to have to start with some extremely sad news that unfortunately Dr. Lionel Kopolovets, the father of the board, our senior past president, has unfortunately passed away. I hope that you will stand with me for 1 minute for a truly fantastic man and stalwart of the Jewish community. Thank you. So we know that Lionel was a true inspiration. He was always here. Baruch Dayan Ha'emet. And I'm going to ask some people to come forward to pay some tributes to the sadness and grief that we feel for Lionel, his widow Sylvia, and family. Jonathan Arkush, would you please come up? And Vivian Weinman will both say a tribute.
Madam President, Deputies, thank you for inviting me to have the honour of saying a few words about my distinguished predecessor, Lionel Kopolovets. He was, for 2/3 of his life, a general practitioner in Newcastle. There weren't many communal roles in Newcastle that Lionel did not fulfil, including bringing congregations together to form the United Hebrew Congregation. He came to live in London, married to Sylvia, and he immediately carried on the burden of communal work that he always shouldered. He was a true servant of the community, a son of Newcastle to the end, and a man whose dedication to the board was quite exceptional. He was a deputy, I think, for 67 years. I remember him as president. I was very young in those days. And Lala and I didn't always agree, because he was at one age of the age spectrum and I was at the other. I'd like to think that in the intervening time, I've learnt a bit more respect. Lionel was someone who I always admired for the breadth and depth of his knowledge on Torah matters. He was always interesting to talk to on Jewish and secular matters, but it was on Jewish matters that many deputies will remember how he would always have a Devar Torah. His knowledge of the Jewish calendar was exhaustive. He knew so much, and he was paid the extraordinary privilege of being named as a contributor to the Lord Sachs Machzorim for his knowledge of Anglo-Jewish custom, or Nusach. His presence here is going to be deeply missed. It's hard for me to look at the front row where he always sat and see that he's not here. But he had the merit of dying in his 90s, suddenly on Shabbat. And may we enjoy his memory, may it bring a blessing to his family and give a smile to us.
Madam President, Deputies, can I echo Johnny's words now and pay tribute to Lionel, who was a proud Jew, a proud citizen of this country, a devoted servant of the community, and a particularly proud member of the Board of Deputies. He believed in it passionately. He served on the board with distinction in several roles, lately as a vice president and then as president. And in the almost 30 years since he retired from being president of the board, he remained active in board matters, attending board meetings regularly, attending executive meetings regularly, and contributing his share of advice and counsel to his successors. And I personally appreciated it a great deal. What I also appreciated with him, not just his devotion and his service, but the way in which his faculties remained undimmed as he grew older. I referred students to him, graduate students to him from University College, who wanted to know about Anglo-Jewish history, and they were amazed at his memory. And I continue to see him quite regularly into his old age, and his faculties were undimmed, his dignity remained intact. The last time I saw him was a mere 10 days ago, where in a rare concession to the heat, he was actually dressed in shorts. But he was generally a man who kept his dignity and kept his decorum and was a devoted servant of the board. I don't feel so sad for him because he had a long and really very happy life and endured a good old age. And as we say in our prayers, Achriso Shalom, his end was peaceful. But I'm sad for us because we've lost a colleague and a past president, and in my case, a friend. So Yehi Zichro Baruch, may his memory be for a blessing.
Malvin Benjamin, Hendon United Synagogue. I first came across Lionel when I was elected as a member of the board as IUJF representative in 1956. We sat opposite each other. Lionel was tall and slim and well-dressed, and what I was particularly impressed with, not only, as Jonathan has mentioned, his wide depth of Jewish knowledge, but also he was very kind. I was a new member of the board, and I must tell you, in those days, young people were not encouraged or indeed tolerated at that time as they are now. But Lionel took me under his wing, and I very much appreciated his kindness that he showed to me and other members of the board, particularly young people. It's now 1956 since I was elected onto the board. And I must tell you, in all the time that I knew Lionel, I don't think I ever saw him have a crossword with anyone either in the board or out of the board. He was the epitome of kindness and of menschlichkeit. He incidentally had a very distinguished medical career. He was chairman of the General Practitioners Committee of the BMA, and he was an ornament to this community. We will miss him very much. He used to come to every board meeting. One of the reasons why he was able to come here, because Jerry Lewis used to bring him every meeting, a kindness which I think he very much appreciated. As I said, we will miss him very much, and in the circumstances, he was a servant and devoted master of the Board of Deputies and of this community. In closing, I would say, if there's any word that would sum him up. He was the epitome of Menschlichkeit. Thank you.
So, Flo, Jerry Lewis, and then one of the younger deputies, Richard Cohen, will give a tribute.
Thank you, Madam President. Fellow deputies, it's appropriate that I should say a few words after my colleagues Malvin and the two former presidents, all of whom served with Lionel. And I echo everything that they have said. You know, the thing about Lionel was his personality, and he always had a pill pool for something or other. And his favourite one is, you won't be surprised. His favourite one is from the Pirkei Avos from Rabbi Shimon. And it goes like this: there are three crowns: the crown of Torah, the crown of priesthood, and the crown of sovereignty. But the crown of a good name outsmarts them all. And he was very fond of quoting that. And I quote that about Lionel because he wore the three crowns and he had a good name. And like Malvin, I never heard him utter his voice in anger. And I heard very little, in fact I can't think of anything now, that was criticism of his personality. It was an honour to have travelled with him. He was very kind to me when I first became a deputy, and he, shall we say, brought me forward because I was a shy little thing, and he was very, very good to me. And I know our present president does the same thing with new young deputies. And like the rest of you, I shall miss him. You know what his thing I think he was most proud of? Do you know what it was? He was father of the board. And whenever he got up, he used to say, "I'm father of the board," and he loved it. So we really will miss him. He was president from 1985 to 1991. So, with love to Lionel. Thank you.
Jerry Lewis, thank you, Madam President, for allowing me to say just a few words. I first met Lionel Koplowitz when I was working for Grubble Janner as his assistant, and we went up to Newcastle to set up an organisation to help Soviet Jewry. And Lionel was the head of the Newcastle Jewish community at the time, and he knew everybody in Newcastle. We wanted to set up an all-encompassing group of bishops, trades union leaders, all the various leaders and dignitaries of Newcastle. But Lionel knew everyone. He was a doctor to the vast number of the Jewish community. It often was said he knew every Jewish woman in Newcastle as well. Exactly what we meant by that, we never found out till he got married. He was elected to vice presidency of this board, still living in Newcastle, but he took his duties so seriously, he used to come down regularly on the overnight sleeper to make sure he was here for honorary officers meetings first thing in the morning and for other duties which he had at the time. He knew every single deputy, and even just the other week when I gave him a lift in, I mentioned the name of somebody who was a deputy many years ago. He knew the name of the person and their constituency and some anecdote about them. He was all-encompassing. His memory was rich to the very end. He beat Martin Savitt, a very close friend of mine, for the presidency of this board by 7 votes. It was a very, very closely contested presidential election. I was a deputy then, and there was such campaigning going on. He taught me how to campaign. He said, phone up everybody early in the morning, late at night, catch them when you can, get them on your side. That's how he became president, and he taught a lot of people the same. He knew the Constitution inside out, and every time I tried to do constitutional amendments, he would argue against me and then approve them. For me, he was a true father figure, like my second father, He was a very, very special guy. He had no enemies. He was a wonderful person. There are many who used to decry his attending executive meetings long after he'd finished his term, but he represented continuity. He could guide presidents, vice presidents and others on the ways and whatnots in each action of their board. And I heard this morning, I hope I'm not breaking any secret, but one of our vice presidents said even she, or he, better be careful, used to get phone calls regularly every few weeks from him just to give a word of advice or guidance. I will end with just one anecdote which lives in my memory amongst many other things. Oh yes, before I forget, he was the one who had introduced and brought Margaret Thatcher to the board to a board lunch we held after our plenary session. We went across to the special centre down Fleet Street and we had a fantastic fundraising lunch with Margaret Thatcher. He's the one that got us into this building. He's the one that made sure we had proper premises after we had to leave the previous premises we're using. But this last anecdote is this. Those of us who remember Woburn House, which is just across the way, will remember the old building. We had the 4th floor. To get out of the building, there were 2 sets of locking doors. He worked late, he worked assiduously, and one Friday afternoon, he came to the first set of doors, let them shut, and then he tried to open the next set of doors, and he couldn't get through. The gap between the doors was this. For 3 hours, he was inside banging away. It's nearly Shabbos! I've got to get home for Shabbos. My wife is waiting for me. A disturbed person, the police thought, was behind the door. Eventually, they managed to get a key holder. It was just before Shabbat, and he was let out. He was full of fun, such a decent person. May his soul rest in peace. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard Cohen, and I know that Warren Ousden also wanted to. Vicky Harris, your 3 of you will have to try to be a bit briefer, but we want you to give your tributes for Lionel.
Madam President, fellow deputies, Richard Cohen, Loughton Federation. In April 2015, I received a telephone call at 8 o'clock, completely out of the blue. Young man, you are a most impertinent person. How dare you put yourself up to be a candidate for President of the Board of Deputies? You don't come to many meetings. You're not on any divisions. What have you got to say for yourself? Well, when I picked myself off the floor, I then had the most remarkable telephone conversation with Lionel that I've ever had with anybody. It was a history lesson and a cross-examination. He asked me about all the kings and queens of England. We discussed the Balfour Declaration, and I'm very pleased to say that by the end of the conversation, I think he had a little bit more respect for me than he did at the beginning. And he said, well, perhaps in view of our conversation, maybe you should stand for Vice President. Well, I didn't take his advice, and we know the consequences. Hello, Jonathan. But because of our love of history, there's just I would like to say something, and hear me out because it's really quite important. In April-May 1940, there was a debate in Parliament about following the fiasco of the Norway attempt by the Allies to keep Norway out of the hands of the Germans. And it was a fiasco, and it led to Neville Chamberlain handing over the reins of power to Churchill. And in that debate, the most remarkable contribution was that of David Lloyd George. And he concluded at the end of the debate that because Prime Minister Chamberlain had spoken of the importance of making sacrifices, the most important sacrifice that Premier Chamberlain could make was to hand over the seals of office. I hope you know what I'm now alluding to, the somewhat unfortunate contribution that Lionel made a couple of meetings back when he spoke about Jeremy Corbyn. And I know what Lionel meant. He meant that Corbyn should follow the example of Neville Chamberlain and hand over the seals of office of the Labour Party. But unfortunately, it came out somewhat infeliciously And I think that must have caused some pain to Lionel and to those that love him. But I'm sure his family will be pleased to know today that we know that that's what Lionel meant. And in fact, Theresa May invited Jeremy Corbyn to do the very same thing only a few days ago. And because of Lionel's love of history, I'd just like to end with a comment that Winston Churchill made in his eulogy to Neville Chamberlain. And because I'm going on a bit, I'm quite happy not to speak in the main debate, because I want to get this in, if you don't mind, Madam President. It is not given to human beings, happily for them, for otherwise life would be intolerable, to foresee or to predict to any large extent the unfolding course of events. In one phase, men seem to have been right. In another, they have been wrong. Then again, a few years later, when the perspective of time has lengthened, all stands in a different setting. There is a new proportion. There is another scale of values. History, with its flickering lamp, stumbles along the trail of the past, trying to reconstruct its scenes, to revive its echoes, and to kindle with pale gleams the passion of former days. What is the worth of all this? The only guide to a man is his conscience. The only shield to his memory is the rectitude and sincerity of his actions. It is very imprudent to walk through life without this shield, because we are so often mocked by the failure of our hopes and the upsetting of our calculations. But with this shield, however the fates may play, we march always in the ranks of honour. Lionel had sincerity and good conscience aplenty, and whose rectitude in thought and action will forever be an example. Thank you.
Warren and Vicky, and we will then move on to the rest of the meeting, but Lionel deserves all of the tributes that are being paid to him.
Warren Aston. Not least because, I'll be brief, not least because Lionel, a man of great humility, would not be pleased that tributes were taking up so much of board business time. A much lesser known office that Lionel undertook in 1985 was as the chairman at my wedding. I braved myself to go and take one of the Geordie women, and he officiated at the ceremony. Everything was perfect. It went like clockwork. Everything Lionel arranged, everything that Lionel said would happen, happened when he said. He never forgot his Geordie roots. In fact, he still keeps very much in touch with the community and offers whatever help to a dwindling community that he can. I was very fond of him. When I turned up at the board, I hadn't told him that I'd been elected a deputy. He recognised me from across the room, came up, greeted me with both my name, the name of my wife, and the date of my wedding. Lionel, we will all miss you.
Vicky Harris, Hampstead Garden Suburb Synagogue. Just two aspects of Lionel that I'd like to remind you about. Firstly, he was an old Polakian and very proud to be so. Secondly, he was a strong promoter of women on the board. He supported my late mother, Zena Cohen, in everything she did, and saw to it that she became the chairman of the Shechita Committee, which was the preserve of men and Rabbonim until my mother got on the scene. And he was the last visitor, other than Amelie Jakubowicz, to my mother a day before she passed away. He's been extraordinarily generous to me over all the years, and I know to many, many other colleagues here on the board and in the wider community. He will be remembered.
Thank you everyone for your tributes. I will personally miss Lionel, his wise advice. He was very supportive to me as well. He's always been there for me. I will miss Lionel. We all will miss Lionel. Thank you for your tributes today. Thank you. Can we move on into the rest of the meeting? Some good news, deputies. In relation to our dinner on the 4th of November, I'm very pleased to be able to announce to you that we have some very, very good news. We are delighted to announce that our guest speaker will be the Right Honourable Tony Blair. Woo, exactly, yes. So, Tony Blair has very graciously accepted our offer to be the guest of honour, and he's going to be interviewed in conversation by a leading broadcast journalist. We will let you know who that's going to be nearer at the time. And this is very, very important for us deputies at a time when anti-Semitism in the Labour Party shows no sign of ending. It's worth reminding ourselves that Tony Blair, Prime Minister for a decade, he won 3 elections and he was always there for us. He was always a friend of the Jewish community and a staunch supporter of the State of Israel. And since standing down as Prime Minister, he's worked tirelessly for peace in the Middle East as a special representative of the Quartet of International Powers and seeking a peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians, whilst the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change focuses on a regional approach to the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. And in our ongoing battle with the Labour Party leadership and its appalling record on anti-Jewish racism, Tony Blair has consistently been outspoken and bravely supported and continues to support the Jewish people. So we are very grateful to you, Tony Blair, for giving up your time to come to the dinner. Plus the fact he's an amazing speaker, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what he's got to say. Now, in relation to the ticket price, we are going to have a ticket price this year, and before Susan Pascoe reminds me about gift aid, I do know, where is Susan? I'm sure, there you are, Susan. Just to say that we know if there is a ticket price, this will affect gift aid, but of course on top of that, where there are voluntary donations, that can attract gift aid. We are raising money. It's our main fundraising event of the year, and we did listen to feedback from deputies last year, so we do have to make sure that we do raise enough money. But we are going to give a concessionary rate to deputies of £125, and those that are under 35, the charge will be reduced to £75. It is our main fundraising event of the year, and there'll be plenty of other events that deputies can attend throughout the year where they do not have to pay. But we have to make sure that we use our money wisely and that we remember this is our fundraising event of the year. Yes, thank you. I can only see a hand. Roger. Just in case I wasn't clear, the normal ticket price is £150, the concession for deputies £120, and £75 for the under 35s, just in case I wasn't. And then there's an appeal, so the amount of money that people give for the appeal, that can be voluntary. that can be for gift aid, but we need to have a ticket price because we need to cover our basic costs. And we did listen to deputy feedback. There was a lot of feedback from the last dinner, so we have to take that into account. And before we have the first speaker, can I just clarify that under the Constitution, Standing Orders 8.1, no speech, let alone questions, without the consent of the chairman of the meeting may last for more than 4 minutes. So as the chairman of the meeting, it's up to me to regulate the meetings. So where we have questions, as I said last meeting, 1.5 minutes will be allowed for questions, but when we have the debate later on, and we have no speaker, so deputies can talk for as long as they want to, the time allowed in the debate will be 4 minutes. So just to be clear, so at the present time, it's 1.5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Roger Giewald, Deputy for St. John's Wood Synagogue. I just want to say, if I may, deputies, that I was a bit disheartened by the low level of applause at the announcement of the dinner speaker. Whatever your opinion of Mr. Blair, and mine is that he's rather ill-maligned, but that's neither here nor there. It's sad that there isn't more enthusiasm for such an extraordinary friend of our community, particularly at a time when his very own party has turned into such a horrendous challenge to us. So I do hope that you'll all rethink his being our dinner speaker and approach it with perhaps a bit more alacrity. And if one evening or afternoon you have nothing better to do, to see the sort of things the man has done for our community, you can Google his name and mine and see my interview with him about Siggy Sternberg, another pillar of our community, and you'll see what kind of person he is. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Roger, but I have to say, from the top table up here, we thought you deputies were really enthusiastic. I think that comes from sitting down the back and not seeing the wonderful smiles on your faces that I can see when we name the name. So, can we have a welcome to our new deputies? Perhaps they can stand up. Firstly, Esther Offenberg, our new president of UJS. Esther. Thank you. Very big welcome. Carl Sandhouse, Sale and District Hebrew Congregation. Not here, but clap anyway, sorry. Peter Ellinger, Wessex Liberal Jewish Community. Thank you. David Benson, Birmingham Central Synagogue. Thank you. Now we also have a welcome for a deputy to be. The paperwork will be completed shortly. But Lynn Davis, please, Southgate Progressive. Thank you. And we have another observer here that I very much hope that their organisation is going to become a member of the board. Can you welcome John Cohen, who works for and is a governor at Hasmonean School. Where's John? Ah, well, he was due to be coming. Okay, well, he was down to come, but okay. We shall move on from that. In relation to the minutes of the board meeting, I've had 2 amendments from Andrew Gilbert and Amanda Bowman during the week, and I'd like to approve those. And I'd also like to explain that this morning, and unfortunately it was far too late to be able to go through the very lengthy email I received from Jerry Lewis, he has proposed some amendments to last time's board meeting, which I will need to look at after this board meeting. I'll need to look at the live streaming, and I'll need to look at the lengthy contents of the email, as I didn't have sufficient time. So I propose that we approve the remainder of the minutes of last time's board meeting, unless anybody else has any other amendments that they wish to propose. Okay, thank you very much. And then I will have to come back to you next board meeting in relation to the amendments that Jerry Lewis would like to his section of the minutes. Thank you very much. We have some other good news. We currently have 37, I've counted, organisations that are members of the Board of Deputies, and we now have an application from the 38th that is before you, and this is the application for the Association of Jewish Refugees. So you should find in your pack some information about AJR, which we'll go through in a minute, and you should have some voting cards. So just to explain to you, under 5F of the Constitution, the Association of Jewish Refugees has been unanimously recommended to become a member organisation by the Constitution Committee, and it requires a vote of 2/3 of the majority of you by a show of hands because it has less than 500 members. So that's the reason why we're having to have a vote today. I'm sure that many of you have heard of the Association of Jewish Refugees, but it's a national charitable organisation representing and supporting Holocaust refugees and survivors throughout Britain. It's also the lead agency of an ad hoc umbrella group which disperses funds for Jewish Nazi victims in this country allocated by the Claims Conference following negotiations with the German government. You will also see the reference to an extensive outreach programme with more than 40 groups in the country, and that there's a team of more than 300 volunteers. And to preserve the legacy of the Jewish refugees from Central Europe, AJR also documents experiences and supports Holocaust education and commemorative projects. It does much more than this and has a groundbreaking testimony collection called Refugee Voices. And I wholeheartedly support this application, and we are noticing an increasing number of non-synagogal bodies wanting to join the board, which I think is a very, very positive development at a time when many Jews are affiliating to the community through such bodies. So I want to thank you. I don't know if anyone has any questions before we proceed to the vote as to whether or not they should be admitted. Does anyone want to speak? Very well. Could we then have a show of hands? And if it looks close, I'll have to divide you into different parts of the room. So all in favour, I hope you're going to see lots of red cards just for once. You're giving me your red cards. I think it's unanimous red cards. Is there anyone against? There is one against. Okay, thank you. We welcome all the AJR representatives and the AJR to the Board of Deputies, and we're very, very looking forward to seeing them next time. A big hand. Thank you. Right, just some housekeeping. We're going to do next the President's statement, and then after that we've got the deputies' debate, and we have lost some time because it was only right and fitting that we had to give tributes for Lionel. And then we've got the division reports, but I want to explain that Stuart unfortunately isn't here, so he will have to take any questions by email or deal with it next time. So that will save a bit of time at that point. And the end of the meeting is at 4:20. So we've got some time to go if we manage our time carefully. So turning to the President's statement. Paul, okay, do you want to come to the microphone? I think that means you've all read the President's statement and you want to proceed straight to questions, which is fine.
Madam President, Paul Edlin, Glasgow Jewish Representative Council. You may have heard about the trial and conviction of Carl Beach and matters relating to people who he made false allegations of being sexual predators, etc. Amongst these people were Greville Janner, perhaps the most distinguished of our presidents, or one of our most distinguished presidents of the 20th century. His family and his reputation were badly damaged by these allegations, which the police have subsequently said were totally unfounded and false. Unfortunately, this board were put in a very difficult position over these allegations, and I really feel it's tantamount to the board to contact his family and express our pleasure to hear that this has been quashed, and to inform them that our community are so happy that his reputation has not been damaged in any way, and that he will be remembered for the greatness he did for our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Justice must be done and be seen to be done. I understand that the inquiry is still continuing, the independent inquiry into the child sexual abuse. So I am sure that justice will be done at the end of that inquiry, is all that I can say about that as present. So thank you. Thank you for that. It's a very, very difficult situation. But justice will be done and the inquiry is continuing. That is my understanding. So there is nothing more that you can say until the inquiry has been completed.
David Behrens, JNF UK. I'd like to commend the part of the President's statement congratulating Boris Johnson on both his election victory and his appointment as Prime Minister. The idea that Boris is an extreme right-wing racist is absolute rubbish. In fact, as a liberal one-nation conservative, he's probably a bit to the left of an unreconstructed Thatcherite like myself. But one thing is clear about politics. Politics is about the pragmatic implementation of ideas and principles. And the Conservative Party, this government, represents the thin blue line protecting Britain's Jewish community. We're one step away from the disaster of a Labour government, and we have to deliver Brexit, because the alternative is to let in the extremists, the Tommy Robinsons and the For Britons, and it's essential that we deliver Brexit. Your
question needs to come quickly. You're on amber.
We also have a great friend in Priti Patel, a great friend to the Jewish community, someone who I count on as a personal friend, who I know we can count on to deliver more protection to the Jewish community. She will be a doughty protector. She will combat anti-Semitism. Thank you very much.
On red. Deputies, can you please only come up to the stand if you want to ask a question, not give statements.
Natalie Shaw, Barnet United Synagogue. Madam President, I was encouraged to see your comments in the President's report about working jointly with Jonathan Goldstein on your statement in response to the letter sent to the Shadow Cabinet a couple of weeks ago. However, I was concerned to see a headline in the weeks before's JC that was far from flattering about your original letter in comparison to the one sent by the JLC. As the Jewish Chronicle is often a newspaper that our constituents read and on which they form their opinions about the board, can we be sure that the executive will do their utmost and ensure more favourable coverage going forward? Such coverage does little to encourage those in our shores who are reticent to pay their communal levies, and it's so important we get a positive message out there. Thank you.
Well, I think there's someone else has asked me to speak about that point, so I'll let them put their point now, and then I'll take both points back. Robert Festenstein has asked to speak on that as well, and then I shall respond.
Just bear with me whilst there we go. Robert Festenstein, Prestwich Hebrew Congregation. My disagreement with Marie over her attitude to the Labour Party, I think, is pretty well known. I was not, though, impressed at all with what the Jewish Chronicle leader had to say about the board, and with your permission, Madam President, can I read out the letter, which, oddly enough, the Jewish Chronicle wouldn't print?
Let us hear it. I'm chairing the meeting, so I have just said I'm prepared to hear this letter. Let's all hear it, because we will be in a better place to answer.
Thank you. Dear Sir, your leader of the 19th of July 2019, why does the board still want to engage with Labour, is as disappointing as it is unwarranted. What makes it disappointing is your personal attack on the President of the Board of Deputies. Recently, the Jewish Chronicle was described as having been saved, and a leader on the 20th of June 2019 declared, "But you, our readers, know you can trust us because of our independence." I'm not sure how this personal attack amounts to an example of independence, frustration perhaps, or even irritation. But to personally pick apart a letter from the President of the Board aimed at dealing with the anti-Semitism in the heart of the Labour Party smacks of partiality, not independence. The reason the comments are unwarranted is that the President has been forthright in her criticism of the Labour Party and his cronies. There is no doubting her resolve in trying to bring to everyone's attention Labour's past and present failings. Her approach is a legitimate one, and to suggest otherwise is unwarranted. I should add that I don't agree with the President. For some time, publicly, I've been asking for a clear declaration that the Labour leader is an anti-Semite, and that the reality is that if Labour treat the Jews as they do now when in opposition, it can only get worse if they get into power. So far, I have been unsuccessful, though I have no intention of giving up. The board is a broad-based organisation, and there are many deputies who support the President in her approach. The board is a democratic organisation, and its President was elected by secret ballot. Whilst I don't believe her approach is the right one, neither do I think it is right to deliver such a personal attack. As for the praise for the JLC, it is easy for such an organisation to take whatever stance they like. They are self-appointed and can largely say or do what they like, provided their wealthy backers approve. At least with the board, if the President adopts an approach the deputies dislike, there is a mechanism to challenge it. Not so the JLC, and so the comparison between the two organisations is unjustified. They are dissimilar entities, and to try and judge them on the same basis is, in your words, misguided and wrong-headed.
So I just want... Thank you. I just wanted to say, in relation to the letter, we had full consultation with my honorary officers and with the executive. We are not a political organisation, and we believe that it's in the interests of the Jewish community and the rest of the UK that we set out what steps Labour are required to take to resolve anti-Semitism. We do not believe that is engaging with the Labour Party, but that is challenging the Labour Party. They are very clear what they have to do, and our approach was very widely endorsed by many Labour MPs and other people in the country who we need to take with us. We can't alone defeat anti-Semitism. We have to get our message across. So this was not something that was done in isolation, and we had full consultation, and the top team at the board, the executive, we were all on board with this approach, and the Jewish Chronicle has got its own agenda.
Can I ask a question now?
You are pushing it. You have to be very brief.
Very briefly, I see that the JLC entertained the Secretary of State for Housing and Local Government in Golders Green. Does the board have any intention of undertaking a similar engagement?
Absolutely. I'm afraid to say that the board was not invited by the JLC on Friday, which is most regrettable, and that is something that we will be discussing with them. But whenever we have meetings in recent times, we have, for example, taken all the communal institutions to the US Embassy. We have, of course, included the JLC. So we will be discussing that with them.
Robert Sachs, Belsize Square Synagogue. Madam President, I'm referring to your response to the tweet by Donald Trump in regard to 4 United States congresswomen when he said they should go back and help fix the broken, crime-infested places from which they came. As I understand it, Madam President, the deputies don't comment on Israeli politics, internal politics. It seems to me perfectly correct that we don't. Should the board be commenting on the politics of any other country, to wit, the United States? My question does not indicate that I support President Trump or that I'm opposed. It's a matter of principle. There was also a statement by a United States Congresswoman that Jesus of Nazareth was a Palestinian. That statement was made in order to break the link between the Jewish people and the State of Israel. Did you comment on that? Thank you, Madam President.
Well, I'll take the latter one first. It's obvious I didn't comment on that, otherwise you wouldn't be asking me. We are very circumspect, it's true, about commenting upon Israel, but when needed we do comment on policies. We've commented also, for example, on Hungary. You will all remember our trip to see the Secretary of State when we were told to mind our own business about anti-Semitism. And wherever there are comments that may be racist, it is our duty to actually comment and make a challenge. And I think in common with many other leaders, maybe I was the only leader in the UK community that did comment, but they were appalling and unjustifiable comments, and even if it's the most powerful man on the planet, we as Jews have a duty to point this out. Thank you.
Geoffrey Gavson, Mill Hill United. Madam President, Deputies, I recently came across a rather troubling report in the Jewish media regarding shechita and a former agriculture minister by the name of George Eustace. I'm now informed by my colleague here, Jerry Lewis, that George Eustace has been reinstated. George Eustace is pressing the government of the day to review the current legal exemptions for religious slaughter. Furthermore, he suggests that MPs should be allowed a free vote on whether to require animals to be stunned before slaughter. At a debate in Westminster Hall recently, he declared that, although he would stop short of banning Jewish and Muslim methods of slaughter, he believed major improvements could be made. Alternatives, he suggested, could be to ban non-stun slaughter, and another would be to require post-stunning after slaughter, for which he stated there was some rabbinical support. He also raised the issue of labelling meat produced by religious methods entering the food market. May I therefore suggest that a rep from Shechita UK enlightens deputies at the September plenary on the up-to-date position regarding this ongoing controversial issue? Thank you.
Thank you very much for raising that. Very important. We are working with members of the APPG, of British Jews, to counter this. And I don't know if he's free, but if Jonathan Arkush is here for the next board meeting, he is a representative of Shahita UK, and he may be able to also speak to us if you're able to do so. Thank you.
Gillian Moodman, Southport Hebrew Congregation. In the new Prime Minister's opening remarks, he referred to the promotion of animal welfare, and I'm just concerned that this may be a new warning light for Shahita in this country.
Thank you.
Brian Gadala, Finchley United Synagogue. The first person who spoke in this particular section referred to the completion of the trial and sentence of Carl Beach last week. As part of the denouement of that trial, it became abundantly clear that Mr. Tom Watson, the deputy leader of the Labour Party, has behaved in an utterly reprehensible manner throughout this sorry and sad affair. Would it not be reasonable to ask that the board be extremely circumspect in future in its relations with Mr. Watson, on the grounds that just because somebody professes to be our friend does not necessarily mean that he is the sort of person with whom we wish to be associated?
I have to say that Tom Watson, in dealing with anti-Semitism, has shown himself to be a real friend of the community, and he's really done all that he can to help fight the good fight for anti-Semitism. I appreciate you have that criticism that you feel, but he has been a good friend, and we need to have good friends.
That may well be true, Madam President, but the same argument, for example...
Thank you, we're not having an exchange. Thank you. Thank you.
The same argument could be made of...
Thank you very much.
Jerry Lewis, Hampstead Synagogue. Forgive me, I forgot to make one important extra addition to the little tribute to Lionel Kopolowicz. That was the rumour that he used to phone up every shul and offer to do a Haftorah is absolutely true. He could do any Haftorah in the book at any moment's notice. The main reason I won't come to the microphone is simply to say to you, your stance on the Labour Party is 1,000% correct, and my colleagues in the press gallery of the House of Commons, I've overheard them saying that you've been doing it very efficiently, in a timely manner, getting the statements out when necessary. It's very important, and I want to thank you for dealing with that. Can I warn everybody, as many of us are aware, we're going to probably have a general election within 2 or 3 months. Could we please have the details of what preparations the board is making for such an election? And my final point is this. You will see that there have been many changes to the nature of the government. George Eustace, as you heard just a moment ago, is back in as the minister dealing with Shahita. I'm worried about the Foreign Office. Dominic Raab, new Foreign Secretary, spent a year, so I'm told, at Beit Zayed University and the West Bank. And the other new minister on the Middle East, just finishing, the other new minister, Andrew Morrison, who's just come back from the Middle East, is a known member of the Conservative Middle East Council.
Thank you.
Please be aware.
Right, we're going to have these two speakers, and then Jonathan Arkush would like to address you, because he has to leave, about the Memorial Foundation for Jewish Culture, and then we will return. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, Stanley Volk, Finchley Progressive Synagogue. I've always been a lifelong Labour supporter, but the headlines in the Jewish Chronicle yesterday seemed to make it some divisive point. Do we support trying to get rid of Jeremy Corbyn, or do we support the Tory new government with Boris Johnson? The board has already congratulated the new Tory leadership. And would it be time, it's now since last February, which is later 14, 15 months since that memorable meeting in Grosvenor Square, which I think was quite a pivot point, the relationship between the board and the Labour Party, and to continue putting out the standards which you want the relationship to continue. I understand that. But as you've got this opportunity of, it would appear to be the new cabinet of the Tory party to be mostly pro-Israel. And I think most people would agree that anti-Semitism is very much bound up with Israel. So often the two are confused.
You're an amber.
But not by us. So warmer relations with the Tory government leading to things like they may well ban the terrorist marches, which is a very important point.
If you've got a question,
Thank you very
you're
much.
finished.
That's my question.
You're out of time. Thank you.
That's my question.
Deputies, please come up to ask questions, and to assist deputies, there is a television screen here where you can see green, amber and red, and one there to help you in case you've missed both of them. Andrew Gilbert.
Andrew Gilbert, Reform Judaism. In 2008 or longer ago, my friend from my student days, John Mann, spoken in great detail about anti-Semitism, and I was heavily involved in getting him to be the chair of the all-party group when there were two other candidates that were being pushed by people in the community. I won't mention their names. At least one of them is now disgraced, unfortunately. But John has been impressive in the extreme. And I'm sure, Madam President, that both to him and to Ian Austin on their new jobs, the board should be giving incredible congratulations, but also they are terribly good friends, both originally and should be part of the Labour Party, and are wonderful friends to our community, and we should always remember our friends.
And just to be clear, quite so, we have written to both of them. And Ian, of course, Ian Austin came to our last board meeting and addressed us all, where we expressed our thanks and our applause to him. Absolutely agree with that. Thank you. Could we just thank you, you can clap, that's it. Could we just let Jonathan Arkush, because he's got to leave, he just wants to address us all on the Memorial Foundation for Jewish Culture, and then we will return to the President's statement.
Jonathan Arkush, past President. Thank you, Madam President. I don't have any address for you. I'm simply here because I am the board's representative on the Memorial Foundation for Jewish Culture, and as such I'm accountable. So I wrote a short report which you'll find in your papers. I'm here to answer any questions. The only thing I would say is this: our community could do so much more to benefit from the Memorial Foundation. If you know any young potential leaders, aged between 20 and 40, 45, who you see as having potential leadership abilities for our community, get them to come and talk to me, or look up the website of the Nahum Goldman Fellowship, which brings together prospective leaders of potential from Jewish communities all over the world for 1 week in the summer in different parts of the world every other year in Israel. It's a life-changing experience for them, and there are so many Jewish leaders have been brought out as a result, and we haven't sent enough from the UK. I'm very happy to answer any questions anyone might have on the Memorial Foundation, and if you don't have any, that's all right too.
Well, come on, who's going to ask a question? Anyone?
That's fine. Anyone who wants to email me and ask anything, if they think about it afterwards, I'm always delighted to help. Thank you so much for fitting me in, because I've got a family function.
And thank you, Jonathan, for continuing with that good work. And like Lionel, for you and indeed Vivian and Henry always being here for us. It really matters. Thank you. Okay, so we're continuing with the President's statement. Would anyone else like to come up? It doesn't look like it. I hope I haven't stopped you from asking any more questions. Okay, we will move on. So you have the executive committee report attached. Any questions on that? Thank you. Well, it's time now for the debate. This is time for as many deputies. You wanted the time last time, so we don't have a speaker. You can all have 4 minutes each, so the time will be adjusted, both on this screen and on that screen. And the debate title is "The Board of Deputies should represent the interests of all strands of British Jewry in the UK and elsewhere." And that is such a wide title. I think it should enable lots of you to want to speak. And we've got a list of people. So perhaps I'll call out your names. If you want to queue up, please do. So we've got, and in no order particularly, Robert Stone, Anthony Adler, Carol Abrahams, Ben Crown, Paul Edlin, David Farby. Now the next lot of people, you might want to wait until you've seen these ones speak, so otherwise you'll be standing a long time. Brian Godalla, Jeremy Michelson, Joe Millis, Gary Mond, Spencer Nathan, Mary Rayner Lee, David Safir, not here, sorry, David Sello, and George White. So sorry, David is here. So you've got 4 minutes. Please speak. Thank you. And any more speakers are welcome, as long as we have to finish at 4:40. Sorry, 4:30 is when we're finishing, and we have to do the divisional reports before then. Thank you.
Let's start the clock. Robert Stone, Finchley Reform Synagogue. In the International Division report in today's meeting, we read of HOs and board officials acting in support of Jews under various circumstances in Malaysia, New Zealand, Quebec, Afghanistan, Central Europe, and the USA. I'm sure that everyone in this room would agree that it is entirely appropriate, as the President said 5 minutes ago, for the Board of Deputies of British Jews to support Jews who are the subject of discrimination and prejudice, whether in the UK or elsewhere. There is a country in the Middle East where Jews are discriminated against and where government ministers and senior politicians constantly attack Jews in the most offensive language. That country is Israel, and the Jews who are attacked are Reform, Conservative, Masorti, Liberal and Progressive Jews. As a British Reform Jew who loves the State of Israel, if not necessarily its government, I'm distressed not only by the impact of that on the Reform Jews in Israel, but also on its impact on the relationship between Israel and the diaspora, and a very important section of the diaspora. In terms of discrimination, you probably already know, to cite a few examples, that Reform, Conservative and other non-Orthodox rabbis are not recognized by the State of Israel, their weddings are not recognized, they cannot officiate at burials in Israel, women are not allowed to say Kaddish in public cemeteries, Reform, Conservative and other congregations and rabbis are not funded by the state, and of course we all know about the Western Wall. The only place in the world where non-Orthodox Jews are specifically discriminated against is Israel. In terms of prejudice, I'm grateful for Rabbi Golan Ben-Chorim, who's an Israeli rabbi currently working in FRS, for the following examples, just a few examples. Aryeh Dera, the leader of the Shas party and Minister of the Interior, has repeatedly railed against more liberal streams of Judaism. In November 2016, he said in the Knesset, "Is this the Judaism we want? I don't want this Judaism, okay? I prefer the original and I don't want these base imitations. It's not the Jewish religion." In April of this year, he said, "The State of Israel is not built for 3 streams of Judaism. We have one Judaism here in Israel. We are not the diaspora." Senior United Torah Judaism members of the Knesset have said similar things or worse. Meir Porish, the Deputy Minister of Education, has said Reform Jews should be sent to the dogs and the women of the wall should be put outside the Jewish camp with the rest of the garbage. Moshe Gafini, another United Torah Judaism MK, said Reform Jews are a group of clowns who stabbed the Torah. To his credit, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has issued statements that reject these attacks and has asked for more respect. But that hasn't stopped the flow of the abuse, even from senior Likud members. David Amsalom of Likud, who was chair of the Knesset Committee on Internal Affairs, has repeatedly attacked non-Orthodox Judaism. His tirade against Reform Judaism last September ended, "The first Reformed Jew was Jesus. He was a Jew, and by the way, a Talmud Chochem, and Christianity developed from him." Far from admonishing this particular Likud colleague, the Prime Minister this very month appointed David Amsalom, who said that, as Minister of Communications in Israel. The board should openly and explicitly work against this discrimination.
You're on amber.
Yeah, work against this discrimination, even though it's directed against only a section of Jews. My own synagogue does not require an eruv because our interpretation of halacha does not deem it as essential. But we should defend the right of Orthodox Jews to have an eruv in Golders Green and Budapest and Paris and anywhere else.
Thank you. We should thank everybody that's coming up to give us their thoughts. Very important. Could you try and make sure you finish and 4 minutes, please, because the traffic lights will tell you and cut you off.
Thank you. I will be substantially briefer. Ben Crown, representing Limud. I think there's a fundamental issue that there are elements of the Jewish community in this country who aren't only not represented in the current membership of the Board of Deputies, but have been sort of quite open and clear about the fact they don't want to be represented and are not prepared to be openly associated with the leadership of the board. This seems to present a fundamental problem. How can the board represent and speak for organisations who aren't prepared to be associated with it? And also, to what extent should the views of this membership and the other organisations the board represents be compromised or be balanced off against organisations who aren't prepared to come here and be part of an open, democratic, transparent, and representative organisation? I think there's a simple answer, which is that the board should represent these groups to the extent that their requests are reasonable and that they don't create harms. But I think we're all aware that in various parts of the community there are issues that it's not necessary to go into them, which are outside the mainstream of the community's belief, which nevertheless the board has, on occasion, advocated for, has criticised the government, for example, over Ofsted and their attitude towards certain types of school inspections. They don't really want to get into the detail of this, which is very much a policy point, but I would really appreciate a clearer guide from the board's leadership on how they interact with Jewish organisations and communities who aren't prepared to be openly associated with us. Thank you.
Thank you for that. That's always a very important question. And you'll, of course, remember from all the work that we've done with the coroners that that's created some very deep links, but it's something that is very important for the future. We remember that the JPR report said that in 2030, half of babies born will be into the Haredi community, and we must keep working at that. Can I just mention, it would be very nice, Carol, if we could hear from Carol next. And are there any other, I wouldn't normally say this, but I want to today. Are there any other women that are going to come up and speak? Perhaps you can come up, because it would be good to have some female people coming up to the debate. And to save people standing for a long time, some of you at the back of the debate, you might want to sit down. It's up to you if you want to continue to stand. But ladies, come on, find your voice. Well done, Denise. Any other ladies, please come up. Carol.
Good afternoon. Carol Abrahams from Catford Synagogue. In South East London, the debate motion is that the Board of Deputies should represent all strands of Jews, and I think that goes without saying. It's pretty much the way Gillian defined the Board of Deputies speaking at the paperweight dinner on Monday. But I would say that there's one area that's not represented despite having deputies, and that is South London Jews. There are over 9,000 of us, but you wouldn't think so, given the difficulty in getting kosher meat, kosher bread, going out for a kosher meal, attending Jewish cultural events. We need more recognition. We need more of you to come to South London. As the most recent Chief Rabbi said, Lord Sachs, it is as far from North London to South London as it is from South London to North London, and yet we are the ones always expected to come up. The Jewish Film Festival does not show films in South London cinemas. The Jewish Book Week does not have events in South London. And there is a concentration on children who attend Jewish schools. Well, there is a Jewish primary in South West London, which is not much use to children in South East London. When my children were at school at the local comprehensive, there was the Association of Jewish Sixth Formers, which gave them a terrific grounding. The AJ6 met in each other's houses, and when the children went to university, they had Jewish friends from all over the country through AJ6. I would like the Board of Deputies to consider sponsoring activities in South East London, to consider ways of supporting our children who we may not want to attend Jewish schools. We have extremely good state schools in South East London.
Thank you. I think you've gone
Thank
red.
you very much.
Now, Carol, I thank you. I think that's a very fair point about South London, and I'm going to think about our next regional weekend, whether we could go south of the river, and you can enter, maybe, and not you personally entertain us, but maybe we could go south.
Thank you, and I hope that you, Mari, will attend our Invest in Peace event.
And if you invite me for Shabbat to speak in your shul, I will come. And an Invest in Peace. Thank you. Right, who's next? Now come on, ladies. Come on. After Denise, there must be another lady that can speak. Well done. Well done. Paul.
Paul Edlin, Glasgow Jewish Representative Council and Chairman of the Board's Regional Council. My speech just now concerns the regions and the Regional Council. Ladies and gentlemen, this organisation is the Board of Deputies of British Jews. It is no longer what it was called before, the London Committee of the Board of Deputies of British Jews. If this board is to be truly representative of all the Jews of Great Britain, it has to represent them all. I want to tell you a few things about Jewish communities in the regions as compared to London. In many ways, they are struggling. Their numbers are reducing, and they don't have the financial resources they used to have, and they have specific needs that the board has got to address for them in their representational duties for them if it is to be seen to be truly a national representative body for the Jewish community. Let me explain this in a little more detail because I don't want to take up too much of your time. We need in the regions community engagement officers and political engagement officers to defend and act for our communities against the threats that we currently face, largely in BDS and various other local matters that the board are unable to act for us from purely in London. We need people in the regions. We need currently to start one person. We need a community engagement officer based in Manchester to service the regions. And your regional council has unanimously supported this and submitted a fully costed proposal to the F&O division. It was not considered, I think, this week, probably because the Treasurer is on holiday, but I hope it will be considered very soon. Please understand the regional council of all the regional deputies, probably some 80 or 90, are unanimously behind this, and we need your support. We cannot function properly without this support. The Jewish Leadership Council are already supplying 4 people such as this throughout the country for political engagements at their cost, £40,000 per person, to keep this service available to these communities, and they are making a difference. We urgently need this person who we wish to be based in Manchester to support our community. If the board does not rise to this challenge quickly, its credibility in the regions will fall away. I urge you, please, to lend your support to your regional council in this. Thank you.
David Farby, Finchley Reform. Good afternoon, everyone. This is an excellent subject, and I thank the President for selecting it. Strands of opinion, but I do hope that it's not just a debate, but it's the beginning of something, that there is follow-up action, and there are lines that we can now follow up on and do something about, reflecting all strands of the Jewish community. Well, I think it's partly a question of process, and perhaps being a bit clearer about what the board's processes are. Exactly how do the deputies and constituencies raise questions, needs, anxieties, problems with the board, see them actioned, monitor what happens, and discuss progress? I think the process needs to be a bit clearer. And in terms of statements of policy, drawing up policies, making statements on matters of current importance, on issues, what is precisely the consultation process? How are soundings made if we are to reflect all strands? And I'd like to see some sort of positioning statement or view on what process might be, because I think it's a little fuzzy. Now, as far as Israel is concerned, I want to echo what Robert Stone said earlier. The board has absolutely a necessity to support Israel. That is, we're bound to it, among other things, by our Constitution, Rule 3D. We're here to further Israel's interest. But I do feel that the board has to be a two-way street. That is to say, a conduit from Israel to us about Israel's needs, anxieties, requirements of the British Jewish community, and we should act upon it. But at the same time, we have to be a conduit into Israel about what we see to be legitimate concerns. Robert raised one of those concerns about the position of progressive Jews in Israel. Now, it's necessary and a right concern, and it can only be in Israel's interest if this concern is met. So I'd ask the President or the right person on the board to raise this, and we'll give full details with the appropriate authority in Israel to see what can be done. It is absolutely in Israel's interest, and it will strengthen Israel if we have an honest relationship with it. The Jewish state has to be the state for all Jews and must be seen to be so. That will help us, that will help them, and that will help make the star of Israel shine all the more brightly.
The traffic light system seems to have stopped, so if somebody...
We've got a few technology problems, and we're relying on a wave from Joel Salmon and a piece of paper. So apologies for that, but we've got our
Wonderful.
eye on the time. Thank you.
Lovely. Okay, so I'm Anthony Adler. I'm from St. Ulman's Mizrahi Synagogue. Forgive me if I sound slightly less confident on this topic than I usually do. You'll understand why in just a moment. As some of you, I believe, may know, I was lucky enough to get married earlier this month. And announcing that publicly at the board has made me quite uncomfortable, because I know that at least a few deputies will not share my unequivocal delight in having got married to the person that I have married. And I know this because some deputies, I don't know if they're here today, but I know this because some deputies have told me so. And the reason for that discomfort is that Ali, my wife, isn't Jewish. Now, the failure of the board and other communal bodies to represent those British Jews who, like me, are in exogamous relationships, if you want a fancy word, is what I want to talk to you about. And I'm going to tell you what it's like and what it leads to and how it harms not just Jews who, like me, have chosen to spend their life with somebody who happens not to be Jewish, but also the whole of our community. So this year, which has been the happiest of my life, I have felt a lot of shame. And I felt shame when Isaac Herzog, the chairman of the Jewish Agency for Israel, said that when on a trip to America he saw many of his friends' children married to people who aren't Jewish, he called that an actual plague. Those were his words, that needed a solution. Imagine how that felt. And when more recently Rafi Peretz, the Israeli education minister, labelled intermarriage between American Jews and non-Jews as being like, and forgive me, deputies, as being like a second Holocaust, those were his words. Imagine how that felt. To have my upcoming marriage described in that way. Imagine how that felt, having that conversation with my then fiancée, now my wife, and with the people who are now my in-laws and who will be the grandparents of our children. Imagine how that felt. And imagine how it felt to hear no one speaking up on our behalf. To hear no one celebrating or even merely affirming our place in the Jewish community. Perhaps there were some voices raised, perhaps I missed them. It's heartening that in October the Rabbinical Assembly that governs Mizrahi rabbis overturned a ruling from 1972 that forbade their members from even attending interfaith marriages. But that is how far we have got to come from. That rabbis couldn't even attend the marriages of their congregants. It's terrible. It's not just me. 26%, and I got this from the board's own website, 26% of Jews who are in married relationships or cohabiting in the UK are married to or in relationships with people who aren't Jewish. That's a lot of Jews to treat like dirt. It's a lot of simchas to shun, and it's a lot of families to hold beneath contempt. And I would be being disingenuous if I pretended not to understand the feelings driving some of these attitudes to what is often, maybe not very nicely, called marrying out. As a community, we carry the weight of a lot of trauma from a terrible history of persecution, of ethnic cleansing, of genocide. And it would be nonsense to pretend that marriages like mine maybe won't play a part in long-term demographic changes in the UK. It's a fact that Jews in exogamous relationships drift away from the community. Imagine why that might be, deputies. Imagine why, with those attitudes, perhaps we disengage, perhaps we feel less comfortable in these spaces, in our communities. Perhaps the failure of the representation by bodies such as the board might play a part in that. So perhaps any Jews, any deputies who feel concerned about the discouragement of Jews in relationships like mine to stay part of the community should think about how to make us feel more welcome, not preemptively decry our loss. And one further thought. The words that I quoted from the Israeli Minister for Education very clearly talk about these relationships in the same terms as the Holocaust. They compare them to a second Holocaust. Had anybody outside our community said those things, condemnation from the board would have been absolute.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. My thanks. I think we have, technology has been restored. Thank you. Would you like to talk? Oh, I'm afraid our technology was short-lived. Sorry, it's back. Right, carry on.
Spencer Nathan, Edgware United Synagogue. Madam President, 1966 was not only the year that England won the World Cup, rather more importantly, it was the year that the Union of Orthodox Hebrew Congregations disaffiliated from the Board of Deputies on the issue of Clause 31 of our Constitution. Until then, only the Chief Rabbi and the Chacham were consulted on religious matters. When this was expanded to include the ecclesiastical authority of the Reform movement, they left. In the 53 years since then, the Haredi numbers have been expanding rapidly for reasons such as early marriage, negligible intermarriage, large families, and strict observance. The projection is that by 2031, 50% of UK Jewish births will be Haredi, and they will account for 30% of young Jewish adults. Synagogue membership statistics indicate that there's been an erosion in numbers for all other groupings except for Masorti from a very low base, especially the Central Orthodox, but also the Reformed, Liberal and Sephardim. In the future, it will be increasingly difficult to claim that we are the sole representative body of British Jewry unless we find a mechanism for including the strictly Orthodox. It is rare that the board consults the ecclesiastical authorities. On organ donation, for example, the board recently put the issue out for consultation to the general community. There could be no return to the status quo ante that existed in the 1960s, and we should consider removing the ecclesiastical authority clause, which also ignores the liberal, Masorti and independent groupings. There are common threats to the whole community, and we need to find a mechanism for the whole community to work together. The board already works together with the Haredim and represents their interests on such issues as guidelines for religious charities, immigration and marriage visas, social housing, universal benefits and many others. We need to recognise how the balance between religious groupings is changing and act in time to accommodate the fastest growing part of the community. If we are to claim that we are the sole democratically elected body representing the interests of all strands of British Jewry in the UK, and may I, Madam President, add my tribute to those already given. The first meeting I attended of the Board of Deputies was chaired by Lionel. I learnt a great deal about how deputies should behave from the dignified way in which he conducted meetings. May his memory be for a blessing.
Right, next Joe will speak, and then I would like, after that, to have a female voice. Mary Rainey Lee had her name down on the list, and then after Joe, and then a few after that, we'll have Denise as well. So I think it's very important. And again, ladies, I encourage you to come and speak. Okay, Joe.
Thank you. Joe Millis, Bromley Reformed Synagogue. First, I'd like to thank Carol for standing up for those of us who live in a southeast London postcode. We are part of the community, after all. Sometimes people think that the Thames going southwards is 60 miles wide and full of crocodiles. But yeah, we're part of London. Also, I'd like to thank Robert and David, because they made points that I think I was trying to make in my question to the President about being critical friends of the State of Israel. And that is what the President, a Likudnik of the old school, not part of the current phagocracy, would say. And yes, if it's to be the nation state of the Jewish people, all the Jewish people, has to take us into consideration too. There you have it. Now to the point in what we're talking about today. Question is, if we're going to reach out to other groups, are they part of the community? Do they believe they're part of the community? Do they want to be part of the community? I would suggest that a lot of the groups that we are talking about, whether Haredim or left-wing or other organizations, not necessarily political, do not see themselves as being really part of the mainstream community. I'll give you two, perhaps, extreme examples. We have Judas and Nahmod on the left, and we have the Haredim, ill-defined, maybe right-wing, certainly obviously orthodox, but not a monolith. Let's look at Judas and Nahmod. They're growing more and more because younger people in this community, and I'll ask for a show of hands here, how many people here are under the age of 45? Not that many.
Who would like to be, is the question from up here.
So not that many, and that may be one of the problems, Madam President. There are more and more of them. And even if you profoundly disagree with their views, and there are some of their views that I profoundly disagree with, even if some of you may not believe that, you cannot fault their commitment to working as Jews. Not as a Jew, like some people who sign letters to the Guardian sometimes, but as Jews within the community, within their synagogues, within their groups. They work on what they believe to be Jewish values. So how do we represent them or engage with them when we have a political bar in our constitution, which prevents, for some reason, if you're any way critical of the State of Israel, some people here think that you're not working in its best interests. That is a problem for me, and for many others, I believe, certainly amongst the younger people. Then there's the Haredim, which I accept are not a monolith, and I'm not sure who represents them, if they have representatives. There are wide groups, from Schrager Stern, who apparently is now bestie friends with Jeremy Corbyn. There's a letter by him in the Observer's Day if you want to look. And I see I'm on Amber. We seem to have a very weird relationship with them. And the weirdest thing is they seem to want us to do things for them, but bring them into us. They don't want to have anything to do with us because reform and, God forbid, women. And that could only lead to mixed dancing. So the question is...
Thank you, you're on red.
That's it, and I will finish with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary, Raina Lee. We'll make sure our 4 minutes is prompt. It's okay.
I don't actually know how to follow that ending. The Board of Deputies represents many strands of Anglo-Jewish opinion. We're bound to have different views. We always will have different views. You put two of us in a room, we've got 10 different views. But we have definitely one interest in common, and that is anti-Semitism. Namely, the anti-Semitism that we have always faced over the millennia, and now we face from the Labour Party. And it's how the board deals with that is a matter of vital and increasing interest to every individual in this room or any individual who cares about equality. I can understand the voices who say we must continue to talk to the Labour Party who are guilty of anti-Semitism because one day they may be in government. Yet many voices say we must stop talking to them because there's no useful purpose to be served. You cannot change the minds of those who are hardline anti-Semites and who now unfortunately control the Labour Party. They must have laughed at the letter that our party, that we sent to the party, our president sent to the party, who did it with the best of intentions and a very long and important letter. Yet I suspect they laughed all the way to the waste paper basket marked waste from the Board of Deputies. Because of the naivety of those who were responsible for the Labour Party constitutional changes, it enabled the extreme left, who carried out with them their anti-Semitism into the mainstream of the Labour Party, that we are in the position we are in today. Most were not supporters of the Labour Party, but took advantage of the constitutional changes to elect Jeremy Corbyn as Labour of the Labour Party, and therefore changing the ethos of the Labour Party itself. And I think the time has come to recognise reality. Although the board is a democratic face of Anglo-Jewry, but the deputies do not formulate board policy. Deputies individually cannot be held responsible for policies they've neither consulted on or put together. Indeed, the strategic policy of the board is held secret. The only way it can be viewed is to go to the board's offices, and I'm not sure it isn't confined to the Defence Division, and it may not be copied or taken away. And it's time, in my view, for the members, the deputies, to have a say in the matter. Evidence supports that we're past talking with the Labour Party, and as a community we must recognise and fear for the future, just as we were afraid for the future when I was a child because of what had just happened to us in the Holocaust. We must do everything we can to expose and fight anti-Semitism wherever it is, but especially in a leading political party. Many loyal members are conflicted between party loyalty and supporting anti-Semites. How many of you are prepared to put on a red rosette and canvass for votes for a Jeremy Corbyn-led government, or indeed vote for it? We know your views on the board. Senior members have been consulted and come up with the views that you've expressed. I believe that you are wrong. I believe we should cut our contacts with the party, and it's with great sadness I say this. There is no way of changing it, in my opinion, from within. It can only be changed through the ballot box and decided by the electorate. And it must therefore happen through an election. And I hope that the outcome would be the extremists who have the iron grip on the party will be dislodged by those loyal and traditional Labour supporters in one way or another. As a board, we must cut off relations with the leaders of the Labour Party. We can still talk to our friends in the party. We must still criticise the party where appropriate, but no longer collaborate with it.
Right, deputies, thank you. Those of you that are talking during the time people are speaking, if I could ask you not to. Now, we've got a lot of people that want to talk, and we all want to hear what they've got to say, but equally we've got divisional reports, and some deputies may be concerned if you don't have an opportunity to ask questions. So that's going to force me, reluctantly, and we can always have another meeting with deputies where they're speaking, to ask deputies to be shorter, because we have to be out of this building at 4:30. So I'm very sorry. Can I take you down to 3 minutes? Because, and all of you might have to decide if you want to speak, because we need to get onto the divisional reports by, I suggest, at about 4:14, 4:15. We need to do that. Thank you.
Denise Lester, South Hampstead United Synagogue. I want to go back to some basics in terms of this debate. There's the ethics of the fathers, which includes the tenet that each Jew is responsible for the other. And there's the expression Klal Yisrael, which in its broadest sense doesn't just mean Israel, it means that we are all part of, if you like, the same, but multi-layered, multi-branched, extended family. We are the representative body for British Jews. We have a collective responsibility under our obligation as deputies, and also Judaically to safeguard, to promote, to be interested, and to look after each other. I think that this board is marvellous. I think that our previous presidents and those former deputies and the history has been exemplary, because we've always looked after the collective. Whether or not we will ascribe to that particular branch of viewpoint, we've always engaged in the dignity of difference to express Lord Saxe's title of his view. In my synagogue, dealing with the issue of intermarriage, someone who is Jewish, who is married to a non-Jewish partner, can walk in without any fear of prejudice. We are very modern and very liberal in outlook, and I'd like to think that we operate within the United Synagogue as others do. If there has been expressions of intolerance to people so that they feel that if they're intermarried they're no longer part of this community, it's outmoded and outdated. And it is not what we are about. Dealing with the board's activities, as being a family lawyer, solicitor specialising in family law, and being a long-standing member of the family law group, I can tell you personally that the board has done exemplary work dealing with the evolution of family law from the advent of civil marriages and same-sex marriages, feeding in, including consultation with the Home Office, and I've been there. And it's been interesting. So I've been there as a deputy dealing directly with the Home Office.
You're on Amber.
I think that we need to look at two things of the boards, dealing with the issue of Jews who are not in South London or not in any community. The board needs to be refocused and energised in thinking of ways, dynamic ways, to engage with other charities in outreach.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Those of you that are left, it's going to be difficult for you all to speak, so perhaps amongst yourselves you can have a discussion as to who will be speaking this time, and if anyone can't speak, I will have their names and let them speak next time in time allowed for deputies. Thank you. Jeremy.
Jeremy Michelson, Manchester Great New and Central Synagogue. I'd like to echo and just enlarge upon something that Paul said, and I'll try and keep it, Paul Edlin that is, try and keep it short. In the last couple of years, several members of the board, honorary officers, plus a number of board officials have visited Greater Manchester and the regions in the northwest, in Lancashire, without letting the Jewish Representative Council of Greater Manchester know about it, where we could have possibly accompanied them to those meetings. In other words, it's a sign really that however much the board tries to, from London outwards, tries to say they care about the regions, etc., it's still very much a patriarchal relationship which really has to end. That is why we need somebody representing the board based in Greater Manchester, but who would be responsible entirely for the north of the country, north of Birmingham, who would be able to empower other communities, be able to link communities together, and be able to really give people the confidence and the know-how and the wherewithal to take power for themselves in their own communities and energize Jewish communities throughout the country. That's really what I have to say. Thank you.
And thank you for your brevity. May I encourage all the speakers, if you can. Anyone that doesn't speak, I will allow them to speak next time when you leave your names. Thank you.
David Safir, Mosaic Reform. Deputies, while I will be characteristically brief because I know we're all working flat out to achieve, or is it to avoid, something due to happen on the 2nd of Cheshvan, which apparently is also Halloween, I still hope, in a nod to our new Prime Minister, to find time to use the following meaningless but distracting words: axiomatic, exegesis, coterminous, and conflation. Surely it's axiomatic, there goes the first one, that the board represent all British Jews, whether for constitutional, moral, or emotional reasons. But since an individual British Jew may not identify or be designated as part of a strand of British Jewry, it would be churlish and unreasonable to decline to represent them as it would for an MP to decline to represent a constituent who didn't vote for him. Let's continue with exegesis of our subject. There goes the second word. There may also be strategic reasons, of course, to represent all strands of British Jewry in the UK and elsewhere. However, we should clarify whether represent means deputise for, advocate and or defend. We should also know whether representation is proactive or reactive, and of course also whether the where, when, where and how of representing all strands of British Jewry, not least because a democratic body clearly cannot insist on representing a person or a strand that doesn't wish to be represented. Represent, advocate and defend are not coterminous, there's my third word, because they do not have the same boundaries or extent in space, time or meaning. So why do I believe the board should indeed represent all strands and individuals of British Jewry in the UK and elsewhere? Possibly because if it doesn't, no one else will. And history tells us, as Jews and as British citizens, that where that can lead. That doesn't mean the board must necessarily represent us directly, since the EJC, WJC, or communal or even non-Jewish British organisations may be better placed to represent us abroad or perhaps online. Possibly the board should represent because if it doesn't, someone else will. And current politics shows how that can lead to Jews being used as human shields, to quote Michelle Goldberg in the New York Times, when Trump criticises the Squad for being anti-Semitic, or could be undermined and patronised when Jeremy Corbyn seeks to define anti-Semitism for us. This from a man who says we don't understand irony, but he certainly doesn't get chutzpah. And lastly, because if the board doesn't, the cynically and politically expedient conflation of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism could grow unchecked. Deputies, the board remains the democratic authoritative voice of British Jews. It must continue to be so.
Thank you. Right, we've got 6 people and like 10 minutes, so please, either amongst yourselves, can you decide who's speaking or speak less, please, to help the others? Thank you.
David Seelow, Deputy for Brighton and Hove Progressive Synagogue, and speaking in support of the resolution. Liberal Judaism first joined the board just under 100 years ago in 1922. It is a committed and proud member of the board. While I expect in the audience today there are deputies who will not agree with all the views expressed and the religious practices of my movement, it is also true that on occasions we will not always agree with statements made and actions carried out in the name of the board. However, I support the resolution because I feel and expect that many in the room will agree that the board is the only communal organisation where synagogue and other Jewish community, groups from across the spectrum have the opportunity to come together and to further the collective interests of the community, and we are democratically constituted. I support and encourage other Jewish organisations and synagogues which do not have deputies to join. I may not agree with all their views and practices. However, we need to listen to and respect one another. There are conditions. Synagogue and community organisations must pay their delegate fees and our communal levies. The board should not carry out activities for groups in our community who fail to make their financial contributions. Finally, we should not allow applications to be subject to set preconditions or dictated by some other interest group.
Thank you, and thank you for your brevity. Please, can you all be brief, because I really would like to hear you all, and it would be good to have another female voice after Gary if the gentlemen would perhaps agree. We will see, they will sort it out amongst themselves. Gary.
Thank you, Madam President. Gary Mon, the Jewish National Fund and Vice Chairman of the Defence Division. If the question is whether the board can represent all strands of Judaism, the answer has to be an unqualified yes. In some way, the situation is analogous to the status of a Member of Parliament who represents all of his or her constituents, whether or not they voted for him or her. A Conservative MP represents those in the constituency who voted Labour, and vice versa, even though they are not aligned politically. For the board, all strands of Judaism can and are represented, even the Haredi community who do not have deputies. An example of this was when earlier this year, the board supported the government's decision not to extend the benefit cap on families with more than 2 children, an action which is particularly beneficial to Haredi families. So we can represent everyone, or can we? If the question focuses on political rather than religious leanings of the community, the situation might be different. Perhaps the acid test is whether or not the board actually speaks to certain groups. With the Haredim, there have been strong channels of communication. But what about left-wing and right-wing groups? Does the board represent Judas? Does the board represent Jewish Voices for Labour? Does the board represent some of the more right-wing Jewish groups, some of the more right-wing groups? The answer has to be that if we refuse to meet them, even with perfectly good and laudable reasons, we can't claim to represent them. I was thinking of the Jewish Defence League in terms of right-wing groups. Does this matter? Perhaps not. There's one trend most of us are aware of. Around the world today, there is, for better or worse, tremendous growth in populist governments of both left-wing and right-wing persuasions. Within Jewish communities too, there are tendencies towards the extremes. On the one hand, there is a growth in the number of Jews who totally reject the existence of the State of Israel. On the other hand, many Jews are concerned about the growth in fundamentalist Islam, which sometimes spills over tragically into anti-Muslim hatred. And the UK is no exception to these trends. Today, the moderate majority holds sway, but I do think that the political centre is getting squeezed over time, and this trend could, if we're not careful, exacerbate substantially in the years to come, with the centre ground being tremendously weakened to the point where it loses credibility as being representative. This is something that both present and future honorary officers will have to take account of when they decide who and who they don't talk to. In conclusion, our decisions on this must be governed by what's in the best interests of British Jews. While different deputies have different views about engaging with Corbyn's Labour Party, we engage because the Labour Party is substantial. Would our action be similar if the Labour Party only had 2 MPs and only 5,000 members? I think we'd simply condemn them, and that would be the end of the matter. The corollary is that if in future Jewish groups of left or right grow substantially, the board may have to reconsider its approach and may find itself having to talk to Jewish groups, which it is shunning today. Thank you.
Right, can I just say, nearly 4 times as many men have spoken as women. And I really think that a woman should be allowed to speak next. We've got 4 times the number of men speaking. Come on. Thank you.
Rosalind Lewis.
Thank you. And remember, women were deputies at the Board of Deputies even before women got the vote. So that is a very proud history. Thank you. Would you like to speak next?
Rosalind Lewis, Kingston Surbiton District United Synagogue. I'm speaking firstly in support of my colleague who spoke so eloquently about South East London. I do want to reassure all the deputies that Judaism is alive and well south of the river. On a recent meeting of Council of Christians and Jews, we had over 100 people to hear Clive Lawton. I have myself organised visits from the various ambassadors from Israel. Again, we've always had over 100 people listening. And I found it very depressing when I look down the various lectures that are on in North London, and it's always a North London address. If only you could give us a chance and bring your interesting meetings to South London, I'm sure you would have a good audience. We also have a very, very thriving education through our synagogues where schools come and we teach them about Judaism. We also have a very interesting Holocaust program. Again, we started it 14 years ago. We had one school with 200 children. We now have 12 schools with about 2,000 children, and we don't have enough facilitators to do more, but we're always asking for it. So don't think South London really doesn't exist. That's the Jewish Chronicles attitude. Whenever we send anything in, it's the smallest insertion in the last pages. Thank you.
George White.
Thank you very much, George. That was very good of you to let her speak. Thank you. It's very appreciated.
Thank you. George White, United Synagogue. Ever since I've been coming here, there have been signs up all over the place, as well as plenary meetings, like this one says, the voice of British Jewry. Now, it's been argued that the board does represent, or they argue they represent the Jewish community, hence why are we even having this particular debate going on? Because they are supposed to be representing. The second point, apart from the title, I have a problem with the word represent. I believe what should be happening is that you, Madam Chairman, and the executive should serve the Jewish community, not necessarily represent them. In terms of your report and the report in the Defence Committee, I suspect that what you are doing and what you are doing in terms of the Labour Party and its anti-Semitism is poor. For me, anti-Semitism is probably the biggest challenge that we're facing and have been facing, and there are many people in the community actually frightened about what isn't going to happen. It seems to me that all the Jewish organizations, it seems to me that you should seek help and support, not just from the deputies, but from the other organizations and the whole of the Jewish community. Because after all, I believe the Jewish community has what it takes to do and make something happen. It isn't just you and the executive. As regards the confidentiality nonsense, that you've basically said, if I come along and behave and do what you're telling me, you might let me peek at the actual strategy, which is supposed to be confidential. If I lived in Edinburgh or Manchester, I'd have to devote a day to come down and peek at this particular strategy. What you should be doing is there needs to be a fundamental paradigm and mindset shift on this and many other subjects for you and the executive and how you deal with it. My message to you, Madam President, the executive, is that if the BOD wants to lead the Jewish community, and you and the executive need to earn the respect and demonstrate inclusive and transparent leadership if you want to do something about all of this lot. Because quite frankly, I haven't got a clue what the strategy is, and whatever it is, it ain't happening because the Labour Party are totally ignoring what we're saying, as well as many other MPs. Thank you.
Rose, your chance. You'll have to be very brief because with 4:20 is the very, very latest.
Yeah. I'd like to thank Robert Stone for his motion. I thought it would be otiose, but it's not. But this is just a plea, on behalf of Reform, Liberal, Majority Jews everywhere. Please don't automatically identify all of us with left-wing causes, either in the United Kingdom or in Israel. And those of us who don't live in North London are getting a bit tired of that stereotype. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, very brief, you two. Thank you very much.
I will try to be brief. Bragadala, Kinloss, Finchley United Synagogue. Earlier this afternoon, and it seems like ancient history now, I was one of the very few, if possibly the only person, who raised a card against the adoption of the Association of Jewish Refugees. I didn't do that because I have anything against the AJR. Quite the contrary, I'm absolutely convinced and satisfied that they do fantastically good work. The reason I opposed their adoption, and I didn't speak to it, I simply raised my card, was basically because of this resolution that we are now discussing. Because it seems to me that in an era in which the bona fides of this organisation to speak on behalf of Anglo Jewry are being questioned, particularly by the likes of left-wing groups like Jewish Voice for Labour and others, it's essential that the board can demonstrate that it does indeed democratically represent the whole of Anglo Jewry. And it seems to me that if you admit organisations where there is considerable overlap of membership, you call that into some question. That wasn't actually the main thing I wanted to say this afternoon. I spent most of yesterday afternoon rereading a pamphlet that I inherited from my late uncle, Mr. David Gedala, written in the early 1970s by the late Abba Bornstein and Bernard Homer, Zichronam Livracha, which detailed the frankly sorry tale that beset this board in the very early 1970s over amendments to its constitution, which have actually been referred to earlier in the afternoon, which resulted, unfortunately, in the withdrawal in, I think, October 1971, rather than it was said earlier in 1966, of the deputies from the Union of Orthodox Hebrew Congregations, and also at the time the Federation of Synagogues, although I note that there are now some Federation shawls that are back in. It seems to me that the board has to find a way to reach out to the UOHC and similarly minded Orthodox congregations to bring them back in somehow. And I would suggest that those who are even now considering revisions to the constitution of the Board of Deputies should seriously give consideration to removing from the new constitution clause 37 and clause 31 and clause 37A, which are the clauses that caused all the trouble that are described in this booklet. If that were to happen, I think it might be possible to bring the Orthodox congregations back in. Thank you.
Thank you. Philippa, thank you, and I know that you will be as brief as you can. Thank you.
Philippa Bernard, Westminster Synagogue. This is going to be the shortest speech this afternoon. It's simply a question. Is this a debate?
Well, it looks like it was, but I think it was a fair and frank exchange of views, and it gives deputies the chance to say what they think, and that's what we're all here for. We're all here to say what we think, and I will, of course, with the executive, we will review the comments. I do want to say, though, in relation to the Labour Party, I think the community can be very proud of how the Board of Deputies has represented the Jewish community, and we have worked very closely with our communal colleagues, the CST and the JLC, in relation to defending the position. We've had many debates here about how we are going to address all of these concerns, and people like Sadiq Khan and Prime Minister Theresa May have given credit to the representation that we have given our community in these challenging times. Thank you. And can I say, we very much enjoyed listening to your views, and we will do this again. It's been a very, very good chance. Now, can we go straight to the division reports? No introductions are going to be given. We're going to go straight to questions because there is no time for anything else. So, Amanda, does anyone have any questions for the Defence Division, please? Any questions? Okay, thank you. And can I repeat, if anyone wants to see the Defence Division strategy, you can ask to go to the Defence Division to actually see that. So please do take that up. Sheila, has anyone got any questions for the International? Susan, would you like to come? Edwin. Okay, sorry. Well, we're on Sheila at the moment. Does anyone have any questions? No, thank you. We may have more time than I thought. Edwin. Susan's coming to the stand.
Susan Pascoe, Nairstraw Community. My question is in relation to point number 2 of your report, headed Education Policy. So under policy, we have the visit of the Education Policy Officer, Jake, to 2 primary schools in Manchester, but we don't have the policy. So what is the policy? To visit all the primary schools in the regions, all primary and secondary schools in the regions? It relates to Jeremy Michelson's point that if you have a heading of policy, is it all primary schools throughout the country? Just if you can elaborate on that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Susan, how can I revert back to you on that? But Madam President, I just want to, because it's the last board meeting before a conference we are holding on September 8th, I just want to urge you to look at it. It's not just a conference, it's an award-listed workshop training. It's directed to Jewish activists on the interfaith field. Last year we did it, it was a full house. We took a bigger place this year and we want a full house again. So just look at it, or if you are not interested yourselves, please find a person in an organization or synagogue who is working on the interfaith. Our teachers and our lecturers and our talkers are from other faiths, and they will let us know how does our message seems from the other side. It's a very important thing to have. For deputies, it's free of charge completely, and anyone who doesn't enjoy it will get his money back.
Thank you. I'd like to end today by again paying tribute to the wonderful Dr. Lionel Kopolovets, and we will let you know by email details of the Shiva. And I want to thank you all for your heartfelt tributes, which were thoroughly deserved on Lionel's part. So thank you all for that. I also want to thank everybody who came up to speak, because it's not easy to come up and speak there for 4 minutes. And people spoke very passionately about what they felt, and it's very important that we respect everybody's views and that we can listen with tolerance and with respect. We are in very difficult and challenging times, particularly with the Labour Party, and you can rest assured that the Board of Deputies is fighting very hard with our communal colleagues on our community's behalf. We are all different, we all matter, but we can all come together to have very constructive meetings and exchanges of points of view. So I want to thank you all today for your contribution and tell you how much it was appreciated. And the date of the next meeting is going to be 11:15 on the 15th of September. So thank you very much, and safe journey home to all of you. Thank you.